Hello everyone, and welcome back to GS Coins, your channel for interesting coins, collecting discoveries, and real-world coin values. In today's video, we are taking a closer look at a fascinating Australian coin, the 50-cent coin from 1969, featuring no mint mark and described in good circulated condition. This coin is especially interesting because 1969 was the first year of the famous 12-sided Australian 50-cent design, which replaced the earlier round 50-cent coin. So, if you have a 1969 Australian 50-cent coin sitting in an old collection, a drawer, or even an inherited coin box, stay with us because we are going to look at its design, history, specifications, minting, condition, and its approximate collector market value in US dollars today. The Australian 50-cent coin from 1969 has an important place in Australian decimal coin history. Australia introduced decimal currency in 1966, and the original 50-cent coin was round and made from silver. However, the rising value of silver quickly created a problem because the metal value of the coin could become greater than its face value. In 1969, Australia introduced a completely different 12-sided 50-cent coin made from copper and nickel. This new shape made the denomination easy to recognize by touch and helped distinguish it from other Australian coins. The 12-sided design has remained one of the most recognizable features of Australian currency for decades. Now let's look at the coin itself. On the obverse is the portrait of Queen Elizabeth II, who appears on Australian decimal coins of this period. The portrait was designed by Arnold Machin and shows the Queen facing to the right. Around the portrait are the inscriptions associated with her title and the country of issue. On the reverse, you can see the Australian Commonwealth coat of arms, featuring the kangaroo and emu along with the shield and other traditional Australian symbols. This reverse design was created by Stuart Devlin and became the standard design for the new 12-sided 50-cent coin. The combination of Queen Elizabeth II on the obverse and the Australian coat of arms on the reverse gives this 1969 coin a very classic appearance that collectors can immediately recognize. One detail that often creates confusion among new collectors is the missing mint mark. This 1969 Australian 50-cent coin does not normally carry a visible mint mark on the coin, and that does not automatically mean that it is a rare mint error. The regular 1969 issue was struck at the Royal Australian Mint in Canberra. Museum Victoria records 14,105,000 50-cent coins struck at Canberra in 1969, while the NGC World Coin Price Guide lists a very similar mintage figure of 14,015,000, so published references can differ slightly. For collectors, the important point is that the 1969 issue was produced in a relatively limited quantity compared with many later Australian 50-cent issues, which makes it an interesting date for Australian decimal coin collectors. The coin is made of copper and nickel rather than silver. It weighs approximately 15.55 grams, has a diameter of about 31.65 millimeters across its flats, and has the distinctive 12-sided shape. This is not the same composition as the famous 1966 round Australian 50-cent coin. The change to copper-nickel was an important part of Australia's transition to the new 12-sided design in 1969. Now let's talk about the condition of the coin, because condition is one of the most important factors when determining collector value. A coin described as good condition is normally a circulated coin showing significant wear from years of handling and use. On a 1969 50-cent coin in good condition, the major design elements should still be identifiable, but the highest points of the portrait, lettering, coat of arms, and other details may be noticeably worn. Scratches, small marks, discoloration, surface dirt, and normal circulation wear can also affect the appearance. A heavily circulated example is generally worth much less than a sharply detailed uncirculated example. So, what is the 1969 Australian 50-cent coin worth today? This is where collectors need to be realistic. A normal circulated example is not automatically $1 million coin simply because it is from 1969. Current online asking prices show ordinary 1969 examples being offered for only a few Australian dollars, while better condition examples can be listed for higher amounts. For a typical good condition circulated coin, a reasonable collector market estimate is around $2 to $5, depending on its exact condition, buyer demand, and whether the coin has any unusual characteristics. Better preserved examples can bring more, while heavily worn or damaged examples may sell for less. As always, an asking price is not the same thing as a confirmed sale price. So collectors should compare actual market activity before assigning a high value to a coin. The most important thing to remember is that condition can make a dramatic difference. If your 1969 Australian 50-cent coin has strong details, clean surfaces, minimal scratches, and attractive original color, it may be worth more than an ordinary good condition example. Coins that have been stored carefully and show little circulation wear are generally more desirable to collectors. However, you should avoid aggressively cleaning the coin. Cleaning can leave scratches or unnatural surfaces and may actually reduce collector value. If you find an old Australian coin, it is usually better to preserve its original surface and have it professionally evaluated if you believe it could be valuable. Another reason collectors enjoy this coin is its historical importance. The 1969 50 cent was not simply another yearly coin. It represents the beginning of a design that became one of Australia's most recognizable circulating coin types. Even today, Australian collectors immediately recognize the 12-sided 50-cent shape. For someone building a complete Australian decimal collection, the 1969 issue is an important early date and is especially interesting because it represents the first year of this 12-sided denomination. If you have one of these coins, take a close look at the date, the 12-sided shape, the Queen Elizabeth portrait, and the Australian coat of arms. Check the surfaces carefully under good lighting and look for unusual errors such as major striking problems, doubled details, off-center strikes, unusual rims, or other characteristics that are genuinely different from the normal design. Small scratches and dents caused by circulation are not necessarily valuable errors. A real mint error can sometimes attract additional collector interest, but it should be verified carefully before assuming that it is rare. So, to summarize, the 1969 Australian 50-cent coin with no mint mark is an important early Australian decimal coin. It was introduced as the new 12-sided 50-cent design and replaced the earlier round silver 50-cent coin. It features Queen Elizabeth II on the obverse and the Australian Commonwealth coat of arms on the reverse, and it was struck in copper nickel at the Royal Australian Mint in Canberra. In good circulated condition, a realistic present-day market estimate is generally around $2 to $5, although the exact value can change depending on condition, demand, and the presence of any unusual features. If you have a 1969 Australian 50-cent coin at home, don't throw it away just because it looks old or worn. Early decimal coins can be fascinating pieces of history, and collecting is not always about finding an extremely expensive coin. Sometimes the real value is the story behind the coin, the year it was made, the people who used it, and the history it represents. And if your coin is in much better condition than the good example discussed in this video, its collector value could be different. So always compare your coin carefully with reliable price guides and recent market sales. Next up, the Australian 50-cent coin from 1971, a classic 12-sided coin with no mint mark and in good circulated condition. If you have one of these Australian coins in an old collection, coin jar, drawer, or family collection, you may be wondering how much it is worth today. In this video, we will explore the history, design, specifications, mintage, condition, and realistic collector market value of the 1971 Australian 50-cent coin in US dollars. The 1971 Australian 50-cent coin is part of the early generation of Australia's famous 12-sided 50-cent pieces. The 12-sided design was introduced in 1969 after Australia moved away from the original round silver 50-cent coin. The change was made because the rising price of silver made the original 50-cent coin uneconomical to produce, while the new shape also helped people distinguish the denomination from the 20-cent coin. The Royal Australian Mint confirms that the 12-sided 50-cent design has a copper-nickel composition of 75% copper and 25% nickel, with a weight of 15.55 grams and a diameter of 31.65 millimeters across the flats. On the front of the 1971 coin, you will see the portrait of Queen Elizabeth II facing right. This portrait was used on Australian decimal coins during this period and represents the era in which the coin circulated. On the reverse is the Australian Commonwealth coat of arms, featuring the kangaroo and emu supporting the shield, along with the year 1971 and the denomination of 50 cents. The coat of arms design was created by Stuart Devlin and became the standard reverse for the early Australian 12-sided 50-cent coins. This combination of the Queen's portrait and the Australian coat of arms makes the 1971 issue an excellent example of early Australian decimal coinage. One important detail about this coin is the absence of a mint mark. A normal 1971 Australian 50-cent circulation coin does not need a mint mark to be considered genuine or unusual. The Royal Australian Mint lists the 1971 issue as a standard 50-cent coin produced at the Royal Australian Mint with a mintage of approximately 21.1 million coins. Another specialist Australian coin reference gives the circulation mintage as 21,056,000 coins. This means the coin is collectible because of its age and place in Australian decimal history. But the missing mint mark by itself does not make an ordinary example an extremely rare error coin. Now let's talk about condition. If your 1971 50-cent coin is in good condition, it has most likely experienced significant circulation. You may notice wear on Queen Elizabeth's portrait, the lettering, the coat of arms, and the higher points of the design. The surfaces can also show scratches, small dents, discoloration, and other signs of everyday use. These marks are normal for a circulated coin and usually keep the value relatively modest. A coin with stronger details, cleaner surfaces, and little circulation wear can be worth more than a heavily worn example. So, what is the 1971 Australian 50-cent coin worth today? Based on current collector price references, the value of an ordinary circulated 1971 example is generally quite modest. Numista currently lists approximately 14 cents for good condition, with higher values for better grades, including around 96 cents in several circulated grades and about $3.5 for an uncirculated example. Because real selling prices can vary depending on the buyer, seller, condition, and market, I would give a typical good condition 1971 Australian 50-cent coin a realistic estimate of around $0.15 to $0.5 with exceptionally nice circulated examples potentially bringing more. This is an estimate rather than a guaranteed selling price, because coin values change over time and actual transactions can differ from guide prices. It is also important not to confuse this 1971 coin with the famous 1966 Australian round 50-cent coin. The 1966 coin was made from 80% silver and 20% copper, while the 1971 coin is the later 12-sided copper-nickel type. The Royal Australian Mint explains that the original silver 50-cent coin was suspended after the silver price increased, and the new shape and alloy were introduced in 1969. So, if you have a 1971 50-cent coin, you are looking at a completely different type of Australian 50-cent piece. Collectors should also examine the coin carefully for genuine mint errors. Look for major off-center strikes, unusual doubling, striking abnormalities, clipped planchets, or other features that clearly differ from the normal design. However, ordinary scratches, dents, corrosion, and damage caused after the coin left the mint are not normally considered valuable mint errors. If you believe your coin has an unusual feature, it is always better to compare it with authenticated examples before assuming that it is rare. Another interesting fact about the 1971 issue is its mintage compared with some neighboring years. The Royal Australian Mint records about 21.1 million 1971 50-cent coins, while 1972 had about 5.6 million and 1973 about 4 million. This makes the 1971 coin more common than some of the lower mintage early 1970s dates. But it remains an important coin for anyone building a complete collection of Australian decimal currency. If you own a 1971 Australian 50-cent coin, the best thing you can do is preserve it in its original condition. Avoid polishing or cleaning it because harsh cleaning can create scratches and remove the original surface, potentially making the coin less desirable to collectors. Instead, store it somewhere dry and protected from unnecessary handling. Even when a coin is not extremely valuable financially, its historical value and place in a collection can still make it worth keeping. So, to summarize, the 1971 Australian 50-cent coin is a 12-sided copper-nickel coin featuring Queen Elizabeth II on the obverse and the Australian Commonwealth coat of arms on the reverse. It has no mint mark on the normal circulation issue, and approximately 21.1 million examples were produced. In good circulated condition, its realistic value today is generally around $0.15 to $0.5 US, while coins in much better condition can bring higher prices. Remember, the exact value depends on condition, appearance, demand, and whether the coin has any genuine unusual characteristics. Next up, the Australian 50-cent coin from 1976, a classic 12-sided coin with no mint mark and in good circulated condition. If you have a 1976 Australian 50-cent coin in an old collection, coin jar, drawer, or family collection, you may be wondering whether this coin is worth more than its face value today. So stay with us as we explore the history, design, specifications, mintage, condition, and realistic market value of this interesting Australian coin in US dollars. The 1976 Australian 50-cent coin belongs to the famous 12-sided series that began in 1969. Australia changed the original round 50-cent coin to a 12-sided design after the earlier silver version became too expensive to continue producing. The new coin was made from copper and nickel and had a distinctive dodecagonal shape that made it easy to recognize. According to the Royal Australian Mint, the standard 50-cent coin from 1969 onward is made from 75% copper and 25% nickel, weighs 15.55 grams, and measures about 31.65 millimeters across the flats. On the obverse of the 1976 coin is the second portrait of Queen Elizabeth II, facing right and wearing a tiara. Around the portrait are the inscriptions identifying Queen Elizabeth II, Australia, and the year 1976. The obverse portrait was designed by Arnold Machin. On the reverse, you can see one of Australia's most recognizable national symbols, the Commonwealth coat of arms. The design includes the kangaroo and emu supporting the shield, with the denomination of 50 cents and the year incorporated into the design. The reverse was designed by Stuart Devlin. One important point about this coin is the no mint mark. A normal 1976 Australian 50-cent circulation coin was struck at the Royal Australian Mint in Canberra, and the absence of a mint mark is normal for this issue. Therefore, simply finding a 1976 50-cent coin without a mint mark does not automatically make it a rare error or an extremely valuable coin. The Royal Australian Mint records approximately 27.3 million 1976 50-cent coins, making it a relatively common issue compared with some of the lower mintage dates from the early 1970s. The 1976 issue is still an interesting coin for collectors because it represents an important period in Australia's decimal currency history. By 1976, the 12-sided copper-nickel 50-cent coin had already become an established part of everyday Australian currency. Millions of these coins entered circulation, meaning that many examples were heavily handled and naturally developed scratches, surface marks, discoloration, and worn details over the years. Now let's talk about the condition of your coin. A coin in good condition is a circulated example with noticeable wear. Queen Elizabeth's portrait may have lost some of its finer details, while the coat of arms on the reverse may also show significant wear. The edges and higher points of the design can appear smooth from years of circulation. This type of wear is normal and does not mean the coin is damaged beyond collectability. However, condition plays a major role in determining the price, and a highly circulated 1976 coin will normally be worth much less than an uncirculated example with sharp details and original surfaces. So, how much is a 1976 Australian 50-cent coin worth today? Current coin references show that ordinary circulated examples have relatively modest values. Numista lists the 1976 circulation issue at about $0.37 in good condition and around $0.88 in several higher circulated grades, with an uncirculated example reaching around $2.3 in its listed guide values. Based on these current references, a realistic estimate for a typical good condition 1976 Australian 50-cent coin is around $0.35 to $0.9 US, depending on its exact condition and collector demand. A particularly attractive coin with better preservation can be worth more, while a heavily worn or damaged example may sell for less. It is very important to understand that online asking prices are not always the same as actual selling prices. Some sellers may list ordinary coins for extremely high amounts, but that does not mean collectors are actually paying those prices. For a normal 1976 Australian 50-cent coin, you should compare established price guides and recent completed sales rather than relying on a single high listing. The current references show that the normal circulated coin remains a relatively affordable collectible. There is also another interesting side to the 1976 issue. The Royal Australian Mint records approximately 27.3 million circulation coins, while Numista lists 27,280,000 circulation examples and separately records 21,200 proof examples. Proof and special collector examples are different from ordinary circulation coins and can have significantly different values. So, if your coin looks unusually sharp, has a special proof like surface, or came from an original collector set, it should not automatically be valued the same way as an ordinary circulated example. Collectors should also carefully inspect the coin for genuine mint errors. Look for major off-center strikes, unusual doubling, clipped planchets, striking problems, or other characteristics that clearly differ from the normal design. However, ordinary scratches, dents, stains, and damage caused after the coin left the mint are generally not valuable mint errors. If you believe your 1976 coin has something unusual, compare it with verified examples before assuming it is rare. Another important tip is to never aggressively clean an old coin just to make it look newer. Polishing, rubbing, chemicals, or abrasive materials can damage the original surface and may actually reduce collector interest. If you find a 1976 Australian 50-cent coin, it is usually better to leave the surface as it is and store the coin safely in a suitable holder or protective container. So, let's summarize everything about the 1976 Australian 50-cent coin. It is a 12-sided copper-nickel coin featuring Queen Elizabeth II on the obverse and the Australian Commonwealth coat of arms on the reverse. It was struck at the Royal Australian Mint, has no mint mark as a normal feature, and approximately 27.3 million circulation examples were produced. For a coin in good circulated condition, a realistic present-day collector value is approximately $0.35 to $0.9 US. While better condition and special examples can be worth more if you have this coin in your collection. Remember that not every old coin has to be worth thousands or millions of dollars to be interesting. The 1976 Australian 50-cent coin is a genuine piece of Australia's decimal currency history, and it can be an excellent addition to a collection of Australian coins. The most important things to check are the date, condition, surface quality, design details, and whether there are any genuine mint errors or special characteristics. Next up, the Australian 50-cent coin from 1979, with no mint mark and in good circulated condition. If you have a 1979 Australian 50-cent coin sitting in an old collection, coin jar, drawer, or family collection, you may be wondering how much it could be worth today. So stay with us as we explore the history, design, mintage, condition, and realistic market value of this interesting Australian coin in US dollars. The 1979 Australian 50-cent coin is part of Australia's famous 12-sided 50-cent series. This distinctive shape was introduced in 1969, replacing the earlier round silver 50-cent coin. The change happened because the value of silver had risen significantly, making the original silver 50-cent coin expensive to produce. The new 12-sided coin was made from copper and nickel and quickly became one of the most recognizable Australian coins. The standard coin contains 75% copper and 25% nickel, weighs approximately 15.55 grams, and measures about 31.65 millimeters across the flats. On the obverse of the 1979 coin is the portrait of Queen Elizabeth II facing right. The portrait was designed by Arnold Machin and was used on Australian decimal coins during this period. Around the portrait are inscriptions identifying Queen Elizabeth II, Australia, and the year 1979. On the reverse is the Australian Commonwealth coat of arms, showing the kangaroo and emu supporting the shield. The denomination, 50 cents, is also clearly displayed. This famous reverse design was created by Stuart Devlin and has become closely associated with Australia's 12-sided 50-cent coin. A very important detail for collectors is the absence of a mint mark. The regular 1979 Australian 50-cent circulation coin does not have a mint mark, so finding one without a mint mark is completely normal. The missing mint mark does not automatically mean that the coin is a rare mint error. The coin was produced at the Royal Australian Mint in Canberra as part of Australia's regular circulating currency. The 1979 issue had a substantial mintage. The Royal Australian Mint records approximately 20.7 million 50-cent coins produced for circulation in 1979. This means the coin is not considered extremely rare in its normal circulated form. However, it remains an interesting collectible because it is now more than 4 decades old and represents an important period in Australia's decimal currency history. Now let's talk about condition. Your coin is described as being in good condition, which means it has experienced noticeable circulation and normal wear. On a good condition 1979 50-cent coin, the Queen's portrait may have lost some of its finer details, and the coat of arms on the reverse can also show significant wear. You may see scratches, small marks, discoloration, or other signs of everyday circulation. These characteristics are normal for an old circulating coin, but they can keep the value relatively low compared with coins in much higher grades. So, what is the 1979 Australian 50-cent coin worth today? For a normal circulated example in good condition, the value is generally close to face value, with collector prices usually only modestly above it. A realistic estimate for a typical good condition 1979 Australian 50-cent coin is around 35 cents to 80 cents US dollars, depending on the exact condition, appearance, and buyer demand. Better preserved examples can be worth more, while heavily worn or damaged coins can be worth less. Remember that coin price guides and online asking prices can differ from actual completed sales. So a high advertised price does not necessarily mean the coin will sell for that amount. The condition of a coin can make a major difference. If your 1979 50-cent coin has sharp details, attractive original surfaces, very little wear, and no significant scratches or damage, it may have greater collector appeal than an ordinary circulated example. Uncirculated coins can command higher prices because they have retained much more of their original detail and surface quality. If your coin has been stored carefully and still looks unusually fresh, it may be worth checking against higher grade examples before deciding its value. Collectors should also examine their 1979 coin carefully for genuine mint errors. Look for unusual features such as a major off-center strike, clipped planchet, significant doubling, unusual lettering, or other abnormalities that were created during the minting process. However, normal scratches, dents, stains, corrosion, and damage that happened after the coin was struck are generally not considered valuable mint errors. If you think your coin has a genuine error, it is best to compare it with authenticated examples or have it professionally examined. Another important point is that you should never clean the coin aggressively. Using polish, chemicals, abrasive materials, or even rough rubbing can damage the original surface. Collectors generally prefer coins that retain their natural surfaces, and cleaning can sometimes reduce a coin's desirability. If you find an old 1979 50-cent coin, simply handle it carefully and store it in a protective holder away from moisture and unnecessary contact. The 1979 Australian 50-cent coin is also interesting because it comes from a period when these 12-sided coins were a normal part of everyday Australian life. Millions of Australians would have handled coins like this while shopping, saving money, or receiving change. Today, these pieces of everyday currency have become small historical objects that connect collectors with Australia's past. So, let's summarize this coin. The 1979 Australian 50-cent coin is a 12-sided copper-nickel coin featuring Queen Elizabeth II on the obverse and the Australian Commonwealth coat of arms on the reverse. It has no mint mark, and that is normal for the regular circulation issue. Approximately 20.7 million were produced for circulation, so an ordinary good condition example is not considered extremely rare. Its realistic market value today is generally around 35 cents to 80 cents US dollars. Although the exact value depends on condition, eye appeal, demand, and whether the coin has any genuine minting error or special characteristic. If you have a 1979 Australian 50-cent coin, don't overlook it just because it may not be worth a large amount of money. Coin collecting is about more than price. Every old coin has a story, and this one represents Australia's famous 12-sided 50-cent design and an important period in the country's decimal currency history. A better condition example or a genuine mint error could be much more interesting to collectors. So always inspect your coins carefully before spending or selling them. Thank you so much for watching GS Coins. If you enjoyed this video about the 1979 Australian 50-cent coin, make sure to subscribe to GS Coins for more videos about old coins, rare coins, Australian coins, world coins, coin values, mint marks, and fascinating pieces of numismatic history. Keep checking your old coins, keep learning about their history, and you never know what interesting treasure might be hiding in your collection. Thanks for watching GS Coins, and I'll see you in the next coin video.